Here I am at Frank's house at more or less our agreed upon meeting time. But Frank is nowhere to be found. He usually greets me at the door, but he's not here, so I'm just going to go ahead, go in myself. Now, admittedly, I may be a tad late. Yes, it is almost 3:25 a.m. Frank seems to have passed out on the couch.
War of 1812. Battle of the Bulge.
Oh god, he's having an ape-bush nightmare.
1945. Hitler. George Bush. 9/11. Oh!
Frank, are you okay?
Yeah, I'm fine. Where were you? You were supposed to be here 4 hours ago.
Well, you know how the traffic can be,
Yeah, apparently. This is the 5th time this has happened this week.
Well, you ready to film?
Yeah, alright. What chapter are we at?
Unit 6, Part 2.
Alright. Hi, I'm Frank.
All right.
And
save that garbage for later. We do not have time for that.
alright then. Let's get to it.
Alright, I've injected some coffee into Frank, so we should be good to go.
And indeed, I am. In part 1, almost all of our examples were continuous reinforcement, when the behavior you want to impart is constantly being reinforced, such as the rat in the Skinner box, who always has to push the lever to get food. Continuous reinforcement leads to rapid learning, but also, as it turns out, rapid extinction. For this reason, partial reinforcement is much more common, both in experimental settings and in nature, and examples abound. When a bee is buzzing around the roses in my backyard, not every flower has pollen. And when Abe is chatting up girls in a bar, not all of them, believe it or not, are into him.
Frank, that guy doesn't even look like me.
Nah, I tried my best. There are different types of reinforcement schedules, however, or the ways in which reinforcement is given to the test subjects. The first one we'll talk about is fixed ratio, and that's where you reinforce a behavior after a specified number of responses. An example of that would be a frequent customer program, where every 5th visit you get a free haircut or burrito or coffee. The second one we'll talk about is variable ratio, and examples of that are similar. Basically, when you get your when bees are interacting with flowers, gamblers are interacting with slot machines, and Abe is interacting with women, it's being reinforced after a random number of responses. So Abe doesn't know which girl will be into him, but one random one might be.
All of them.
You wish. Next is fixed interval, which reinforces only after a specified time has elapsed. Examples of this would be getting your salary at the end of the month. And finally, we have variable interval, which reinforces after a random amount of time has passed. And an example of that would be random drug tests of athletes. Abe, what's the opposite of reinforcement?
Well, it starts with a P. It's called punishment. Now, punishment decreases the frequency of the behavior that it precedes. And there are 4 problems with punishing children. The first is that punishing children merely suppresses the behavior. Punishing children does not completely remove the behavior, and the behavior can return. 2, punishment teaches discrimination. The lesson the child learns from the punishment may not be complete. If a parent punishes a child for swearing, the child may only learn that swearing is not permitted in the house, but he or she may still swear elsewhere. The third problem is that punishment teaches fear. If a teacher whacks kids on the wrist with a ruler, kids may learn to fear the teacher and thus attempt to avoid school. The fourth problem is that punishment can teach aggressiveness, and you can see an aggressive form of punishment on the right with Frank in that picture. Aggressive delinquents tend to come from abusive families, so aggressive punishment is not recommended. Now, there is a very effective dual approach for changing behavior. It's when you use both punishment and reinforcement. As the book so eloquently states, punishment tells you what not to do, reinforcement tells you what to do. So, on the days that Frank didn't show up to A-Push class, I refused to eat lunch with him, making him eat alone. But on the days he did, I gave him one of my cookies. Thus, I'm using both punishment and reinforcement to encourage Frank to show up to class. When using the dual approach, most psychologists recommend emphasizing reinforcement. So Frank, what else can we learn from Skinner's work?
A couple things. While Skinner's work made great progress overall, it failed to delve into the actual mental processes at work within the mind. It didn't look at the influence of thoughts, perceptions, expectations, and emotions, which do manifest themselves in behaviors. Two types of this are cognitive maps and latent learning. Cognitive maps are a mental representation of one's environment. Mental maps are formed in your mind after you've done something enough. For example, when you've walked through your house enough, you could probably do a pretty good job walking through, even with a blindfold on, as Abe will now demonstrate.
Gotcha. I'm pretty sure the kitchen is right here.
Yeah, keep walking, buddy. Or maybe not. The other aspect is latent learning, or automatic, almost accidental learning. This can occur while riding shotgun in a car, when you subconsciously learn the route that the driver's taking, to a certain extent. There are, however, limitations to what can be taught through operant or classical conditioning, and these are largely found in biological constraints. Animals generally will learn behaviors quicker if they are grounded in some basic association. It's far easier to teach pigeons to peck for food than to fly in circles for food. Abe, now that we've extended Skinner's understanding, can you tell me more about the applications of Skinner's work?
Sure. So Skinner emphasized that external influences determine behavior, not internal thoughts and feelings. So many of Skinner's critics claimed that Skinner dehumanized people and simply sought to control their actions. Now, let's talk about the applications of operant conditioning. First, let's discuss how Skinner believed school could be improved. Skinner's plan was to have computers deliver exercises paced to each student's rate of learning. The computers would also give immediate feedback, telling the student if he or she was correct or incorrect, and then directing them immediately to the next step. Now, Skinner on sports. Skinner emphasized that reinforcing small successes and then gradually increasing the challenge was the best way to improve at a sport. For example, the book discusses an efficient way of learning how to bat in baseball. A batter should start a mere 10 feet away from the pitcher and be fed an oversized ball. As the batter improves, the pitcher can move back, maybe to 15 feet, then 20, then 25, and so on. Eventually, the pitcher can start throwing a standard baseball, too. Now, superstition can derive from accidental rewards. For example, in the baseball example, if a baseball player gets on base each time he taps his bat to the plate before a pitch, he may become superstitious. The player is essentially receiving partial reinforcement each time he gets a hit after tapping his bat on the plate. Let's talk about more applications of operant conditioning. At home, parents should not give in to defiance. If a parent tells a child to turn the TV off, but ultimately allows the child to keep watching because the parent gave in to the child's whining, this reinforces the child's whining behavior. Parents should remember the basic rule of shaping. When they see their children doing something right, encourage them. Providing children with attention when they behave well is the best formula for parenting. Operant conditioning can also apply to self-improvement. The first step is to define and declare a goal. For example, Frank might realize that American history takes up too much of his life. He might tell his friends that instead of spending 10 hours a day reading the American pageant, he's only going to spend 8. The second step is to monitor your behavior. In this case, Frank might begin to log how much time a day he spends reading the pageant and analyze what conditions cause him to read for too long. The third step is to reinforce the desired behavior. So each day that Frank stops himself from reading the pageant for too long, he might reward himself with a tasty juice box in his lunch. The fourth step is to reduce the rewards. As Frank builds a habit of only reading the pageant for 8 hours a day, he may begin to reward himself with a juice box for every 2 days that he achieves his goal. So Frank, is there a third way to view learning?
Well, kind of. Learning by observation or observational learning is as simple as it sounds. Humans, along with most animals, learn a great deal through watching the actions of others. This process is called modeling, and it's incredibly simple and widespread. Think about this. Even if you've never in your life snorted cocaine, you probably know how to do it just from watching movies and TV, and the same is true largely for sex. This learning occurs in part due to mirror neurons, or neurons that fire when observing the behavior of others. Albert Bandura is the man to know when it comes to learning by observation. His experiments revolve around the now famous Bobo doll, seen in the image on the right. Children watched an adult beat up the creepy Bobo doll clown, and then were left alone in a room with the Bobo doll themselves. As we'd expect, and as we can see in that image, they promptly attacked the clown in manners similar to the adults, showing that children learn through watching their elders. Abe, we just learned a lot about observational learning, but how can we apply it?
Let me tell you. So as human beings, we look and we learn. We learn best with clear instructions and proper demonstrations of how to perform the given task. We define pro-social behavior as, quote, positive, constructive, helpful behavior. And pro-social models have pro-social effects. For example, if you want to maximize the chance that your children are religious, go to church and attend other religious activities with them. However, observational learning can also have anti-social effects. One particularly influential source of observational learning is TV, and studies suggest violent television programs promote violent behavior. For example, in both Canada and in the US from 1957 and 1974, during the period when TV was first introduced and growing more popular, homicide rates doubled. However, recall from Unit 2 that correlation does not imply causation. So this study does not prove that violent TV causes aggression. Now, the consensus of the research community is that violent television does indeed cause aggression in children and teenagers because of two factors. The first is imitation. When we watch TV, our mirror neurons simulate the behavior we observe, making us more likely to act out the behavior in the future. The second factor is desensitivization. The more people see violence, whether on TV or in real life, the more they become indifferent to it.
So over these past two videos, we've talked a lot about the ideas of classical conditioning and operant conditioning. And because I know that they're going to come up on the AP test, Abe and I just want to make sure we're absolutely clear on the differences between the two.
So with classical conditioning, one example to remember is Pavlov's dogs. You can also think of lightning and thunder. That's learning to associate two stimuli, one lightning, the other thunder, and then learning to anticipate an event. So if you hear the lightning and then you hear thunder after it, you're going to associate those two stimuli. So when you hear lightning, you can learn to brace yourself for the thunder.
What's the matter? Scared of a little lightning?
I'm not overly fond of what follows.
It's also important to remember that animals learn from association, and that in classical conditioning, acquisition leads to learned behaviors.
Perfect. And operant conditioning is similarly simple once you get a grasp of it. Here you should think about Skinner's rats in the Skinner box. Essentially, an animal's actions determine outcomes. With the example of the Skinner box, we had the rat which pushed a lever in order to give it the food pellet. Unlike in classical conditioning, where the trainer would give you the food pellet and then you would do the action, in operant conditioning, the animal's action precedes the outcome. So instead of acquisition shaping behavior, shaping leads to the behavior. Thank you for watching.
Please like and subscribe.
And comment down below if you have any questions.
We'll catch you guys next time.